This house isn't yours anymore, Mom. It's for Celeste's parents now. You can start packing. Nathan's words landed with the dull thud of something that had been rehearsed. He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared at the tile grout between his polished shoes, the way people do when they know they've done something cruel but want to pretend it's practical. I didn't flinch. My hands were still wet from washing breakfast dishes. I turned off the faucet, reached for the towel, with the faded lemon stitched on the corner, the one George and I bought at the county fair in '84, and dried them slowly, methodically. When I finally spoke, my voice came out calm. You're evicting me from my own home. Nathan's eyes flickered upward, the guilt there so brief it might have been imagined. It's not like that, Mom. It's just Celeste's parents are getting older, and we need more space. You've had your time here. Your time. Like I was a tenant whose lease had expired. Celeste stood leaning in the doorway, her arms folded, her silk robe whispering each time she shifted her weight. She didn't speak, not yet. Her smile said everything. She looked like a woman who'd already measured the curtains and picked out the new color palette. Nathan cleared his throat. The senior apartments on Ashbury Lane are nice, modern, safe. You'd have your independence. Independence. What a lovely word for exile. I looked past them to the window above the sink. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, their heads heavy with color, blue like the ocean we never made time to see. George had planted them himself, said they'd outlast both of us if we took care of them. And they had. I turned back, dried my hands again, folded the towel neatly, and set it on the counter. Okay, I said. Celeste blinked, caught off guard. Wait. What? I said okay, I'll start packing. Nathan's face softened with relief, as if he'd dodged something. You're not going to make this difficult? I don't see the point, I said, smiling faintly, not kindly. You've already decided. They exchanged a look that people share when they believe the story's over. Celeste's smile widened, small and triumphant. Good, she said. It'll be easier this way. And just like that, they left me in the kitchen. For a long time, I didn't move. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed. The hydrangeas outside nodded in the wind, patient as always. Then I dried the sink, straightened the chair cushion, and wiped a crumb from the counter. I placed my tea mug in the dishwasher, hands steady. Then I walked to the hallway, opened the coat closet, and reached for the umbrella stand. Behind it, tucked beneath the folded raincoats, was a small keypad. My fingers didn't tremble as I entered the code. A quiet click. Inside, a fireproof safe, not a large one, just enough for a few documents and what George used to call a woman's protection plan. I took out a thin folder labeled "In case it's needed" and set it on the dining table. Inside were the originals of everything that mattered. The deed to the house, George's notarized will, the financial agreement we'd signed after his heart attack 20 years ago, and, most importantly, a trust established 6 months earlier, a revocable living trust, placing full ownership of the house in my name, with successor rights to Leo Drayton, my grandson, Nathan's son. They didn't know that part yet. Leo was the only one who still visited because he wanted to, not because guilt or holidays required it. Last week, he'd sat on the porch swing with me, eating ginger cookies and watching the rain. He'd said, "Grandma, don't let them talk to you like you're in the way. You built this place." He had George's voice when he said it. Steady, certain. I hadn't planned the trust out of revenge. I'd planned it because I'd learned that you don't wait for the fire to start before checking if you have a way out. I returned the folder to the safe, closed the door, and locked it. My reflection in the dark glass looked older than I felt, but also, for the first time in years, unafraid. That evening, I made dinner. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, Nathan's favorites since he was a boy. Celeste picked at her salad, pushing leaves across the plate like she was rearranging her conscience. At the table, Nathan talked about work, about his new promotion. Celeste mentioned her plans to redo the kitchen after the move. I nodded, smiled where appropriate, and listened to the two people who'd just decided I was no longer part of their lives. Inside, something shifted. It wasn't rage, it was recognition. I was done being the peacekeeper. They thought I'd go quietly, that I'd pack up boxes, sign over keys, fade into some soft little retirement complex, and never make a sound. They didn't know me at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because the memories came the kind that hums softly at the edge of consciousness. George laughing as he painted the front door. Nathan at 10, holding a frog and insisting it was his business partner. The nights we'd stayed up fixing the heater when we couldn't afford a plumber. Every piece of this house had our fingerprints somewhere inside it. And now my own son wanted to scrub them away. I turned to the ceiling fan, its slow rotation whispering like a metronome for thought. I'd spent 72 years learning how to survive in silence. That skill was about to come in handy. They think I'll just leave, I whispered to the dark. But I built this house. I built all of it. And for the first time in months, I smiled small, sharp, certain. If you've ever been underestimated by your own blood, if someone ever tried to take what you've spent your whole life building, keep listening. You'll want to hear how this ends. Morning light spilled across the kitchen, turning the worn tile into patches of soft gold. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee, tracing the grain of the wood the way I used to trace George's palm out of habit, out of comfort. 42 years. That's how long this table had been here. Bought second-hand when we couldn't afford new. George had tightened every loose leg himself, muttering about craftsmanship and making do with what lasts. I remember the first night we ate at it, beans and toast, 2 chipped plates, and a candle stuck in a jar of salt. We didn't have much, but we had a home that was ours, not borrowed or given. George had built most of it himself, too. We poured the foundation one sticky July morning, him in his old baseball cap, me with a bandana tied around my hair. One day, he'd said, this house will outlive us both. He was right. But he never could have imagined that our son would be the one trying to bury me while it still stood. After breakfast, I walked to the backyard. The hydrangeas were heavy with dew, petals cool under my fingers. George planted them because they reminded him of his mother. Stubborn things, he used to call them. They die down every winter, but they never really die. It was in this garden that Nathan took his first steps, right by the apple tree, giggling as George pretended to stumble behind him. I could still see it, Nathan's chubby fingers clutching the air, his little shoes kicking up clumps of dirt. That boy, that laughter, that version of him gone now, replaced by a man who spoke in real estate terms and talked about liquidating assets like they were groceries on a list. It wasn't always like this. When Celeste came into our lives, I tried to believe she'd soften him. She was so polished, so deliberate, always smelled faintly of roses and ambition. I remember their wedding, her mother in pearls, her father giving a toast about merging families, as if we were corporations signing a deal. George whispered to me that day, "Don't worry, Ellie. The boy just wants to impress her. It'll pass." But George died before he could see how wrong he was. After the funeral, Celeste moved in to help me, she'd said. At first, she cooked once or twice, cleaned occasionally, brought me tea in the evenings. It was almost kind. But kindness from Celeste was like a tax break, calculated, conditional, short-lived. Within a year, she started calling the house our place. She changed curtains, repainted walls, and suggested decluttering. I didn't argue. It was easier to let her think she was winning small battles while I built fortresses in silence. By the time Nathan started talking about selling, I already had a plan. Mr. Halverson, George's old attorney, had helped me set it up. He was in his 80s now, but sharp as a tack. When I brought him muffins and papers one Tuesday afternoon, he chuckled. "You've always been 3 steps ahead, Helen." "I've learned," I told him, "that being sentimental doesn't mean being stupid." We spent 2 hours drafting the trust. I remember signing my name in blue ink, my hand steady as if George were holding it. The afternoon after Nathan's ultimatum, Celeste came home early. She walked into the kitchen in her cream-colored robe, the one she always wore like armor, and began wiping the counters I'd already cleaned. "You left flour near the stove," she said without looking at me. "I'll take care of it." She continued scrubbing, more aggressively this time. "We're having a photographer over next week for our holiday cards." "How lovely," I said. "I was thinking we should repaint in here," she added. "This green is so dated." "That green," I said evenly, "is called seagrass. George picked it. He said it made the kitchen feel alive." Celeste smiled that thin-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. "Well, maybe it's time for something new." I poured myself another cup of coffee, the silence stretching between us like a wire, ready to snap. "Tired doesn't always mean replaceable," I said softly. She blinked, confused for a second, then looked away. "Evan agrees," she said quickly. "We've made a list of updates." Of course they had. That night, I sat in the sunroom, the same one Celeste had called cluttered when she first moved in. The lace curtains filtered the moonlight into soft ribbons. I thought of George, his rough hands, the way he used to whistle when he worked, how he'd lean back after a long day and say, "We built something real, Helen." I smiled to myself. "We did," I whispered. "And it's still real, even if they can't see it." In the morning, I'd start my own list, not of what to pack, but of what to protect. At dawn, I opened the drawer under the telephone and pulled out my notebook, leather-bound, brown, given to me by George one Christmas, with a note inside that said, "Write down what matters. Forget the rest." Page 1. Property tax receipts, paid by me. Insurance renewal, in my name. Mortgage, cleared 10 years ago, signed by George and me. I underlined each line twice. Then, beneath it, I wrote, "They see wallpaper and windows. I see 40 years of breath." When I looked up, the first light of morning was crawling across the wall. Celeste's footsteps echoed upstairs, her morning routine, rehearsed and predictable. I closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer, and smiled faintly. They thought I was small, weak, sentimental. They forgot that sentiment built this house. And what's built with love doesn't crumble under greed. It began slowly, not with shouting or arguments, but with the kind of quiet edits that erase a life in small strokes. First, my lace curtains vanished from the living room. Celeste replaced them with sheer white panels. "More modern," she said. Then the books from the oak shelf in the corner disappeared, one by one, my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, George's old woodworking manuals, even the photo album from our 25th anniversary. When I asked about it, Celeste smiled. "Oh, those. I boxed them for you. You'll have more space once you move." More space. That's what she called emptiness. I didn't argue. I just made a note in my leather-bound journal. Day 3. Curtains gone. Books gone. Photo albums boxed. The disappearing act continues. I remain visible, but only just. Every entry was another brick in the wall I was building, not around myself, but between us. On the 4th day, she brought home a designer, a young man with expensive shoes and a laptop that probably cost more than my car. He walked around with a digital pad, murmuring words like minimalism, flow, and natural light. He pointed at my reading nook, the one with George's old armchair. "We'll replace this," he said. "Something sleeker, streamlined." I was sitting in that chair. He didn't even seem to notice. Celeste nodded approvingly, her red nails glinting under the pendant light. Exactly what I was thinking. I ran my fingers over the armrest, tracing the spot where George's ring had worn down the varnish. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. "It's a lovely idea, but you'll have to ask the owner first." The designer looked confused. "Oh, you mean Nathan?" Celeste froze. I didn't blink. "No," I said quietly. "Me." He stammered something about concepts and measurements, then excused himself to make a call. Celeste didn't look at me for a long time. When she finally did, her expression was all pearl and venom. "Don't make this difficult," she said softly. "You don't want to embarrass yourself." "I stopped worrying about embarrassment years ago," I replied, usually right after I finished paying the mortgage. Her mouth twitched, not a smile, not a frown, just the briefest sign of cracks forming. Then she turned and left. That night, I cooked chicken stew. Nathan used to love it when he was little, back when dinner was laughter and scraped knees, and George's voice reading the newspaper aloud. Now, Nathan came home late, smelling of aftershave and exhaustion. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I wanted to," I replied. "You liked this as a boy." He smiled faintly, sitting down at the table. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." He hesitated, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Celeste says you've been tense lately." "Tense," I repeated. "That's an interesting word." "She's just worried," he said quickly. "You've been quiet." "Maybe I finally learned it from her," I said, and went back to eating. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. He finished half his bowl, thanked me, and went upstairs. When I washed the dishes afterward, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. Small, deliberate, unbroken. The next morning, I found my armchair missing. The one George built himself, the one that had outlived him by 12 years. Gone. "Where's my chair?" I asked Celeste, though I already knew. "Oh," she said lightly, sipping her green smoothie. "The designer took it. Donation." "Donation?" It looked worn. "Like me?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She put her glass in the sink, the clink sharp and final. It was taking up space. I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Everything worth keeping takes up space." Her hand tightened on the counter. "You can't guilt us into letting go of the past, Helen. This is about moving forward." "No," I said softly. "This is about moving me out." Her face froze. "That's unfair." "So is betrayal." We stood there, silence stretching like a fault line between us. Then she walked out, her perfume lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Later that afternoon, I called Leo. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm, steady, so much like George's that it caught me off guard. "Hey, Grandma, can you come by this weekend?" "Of course." "Everything okay?" "Yes, I just have something I want to talk to you about." He hesitated. "Is this about Dad?" "It's about the house." Silence then. "I'll be there." That evening, I went to the safe again, not to change anything, just to see it. To remind myself that I still held the truth in black ink and legal seals. The folder was there, the trust intact, my name clear and final. George's signature on the old deed, Leo's name waiting for his turn. I ran a finger along the paper's edge and whispered, "You thought you could erase me, Nathan, but I learned from your father always keep the blueprint." Then I closed the safe and went upstairs, where the guest room Celeste had insisted I try out waited with its staged pillows and sterile light. I didn't sleep there. Instead, I sat by the window of my real bedroom, the air heavy with lemon polish and ghosts. Outside, the hydrangeas swayed in the wind, bent but not broken. "Let them keep talking," I murmured. "Let them think I'm fading." The reflection in the glass smiled back at me. "I'm just beginning." Leo arrived on Saturday morning, just as the sun was burning off the last of the fog. I heard the familiar crunch of his car tires on the gravel driveway and felt a small flicker of peace, the kind that comes when someone decent still remembers where you live. He knocked, even though the door was open, just like he always did. That small courtesy, that single knock reminded me that respect still existed somewhere in our family line. "Grandma," he said, smiling as he stepped inside. His hair was a little longer now, a rougher edge to him, but his eyes steady, clear, and kind were the same. "Coffee's fresh," I said. He grinned. "You read my mind." We sat in the sunroom, the one Celeste had called outdated. The lace curtains filtered the light into soft shapes, and the air smelled faintly of hydrangea and dust. Leo leaned back, long legs stretched out, looking perfectly at home like George used to after a long day. "So," he said after a moment, "you sounded serious on the phone. I wanted to talk to you about the house." His brow furrowed. "I figured. Dad said something's going on." I smiled, thinly. "Oh, he did? And what did he say?" "That you've been distant lately, harder to talk to." "Funny," I said. "I thought he'd have trouble seeing anyone from that far up on his high horse." Leo laughed softly. "You always had that sharp tongue." "I lost a lot in 72 years, Leo," I said. "My sharp tongue isn't one of them." I handed him an envelope from my cardigan pocket. It was sealed, the paper thick, my handwriting deliberate. "What's this?" he asked. "Something for safekeeping. Not to open yet." He turned it over. I'm not dying," I said quickly. "Not anytime soon. I'm just done trusting people who think they're entitled to what they didn't earn." He looked down at the envelope again, then slid it carefully into his jacket. "You want me to keep this somewhere specific?" "Somewhere private, somewhere safe, somewhere that isn't here." He nodded, no questions. That was what I loved most about him. His understanding came from instinct, not obligation. We talked for a while, about work and the world outside my shrinking home. He'd lost his job last month, a startup in the city had folded, leaving everyone scrambling. He said it with a shrug, pretending it didn't sting, but I saw the exhaustion behind his easy smile. "I'll be fine," he said. "I've got time to figure things out." "Time," I murmured. "That's the one thing people your age think you have forever." He tilted his head. "And you don't?" "I have plenty," I said. "I just know what to do with it now." He studied me for a long moment, then said, "You've been writing again." I blinked. "How do you know that?" "There's ink on your thumb. And that look in your eyes, the one that says you've got something cooking in that head of yours." I smiled. You're too observant for your own good. Or yours, he said gently. When he left that afternoon, he hugged me, not the quick, distracted kind people give their elders, but a real one. I held on a little longer than usual. Don't tell your father we met today, I said. He nodded. I figured as much. As he started down the path, he turned back. Grandma? Yes? You're not afraid of them, are you? Afraid? I said, smiling faintly. No, I'm disappointed, which is much worse for them. He laughed softly and waved. I watched his car disappear around the curve of the drive, the sound fading into the afternoon stillness. That evening, the air was heavy, the sky bruised purple with the promise of rain. I sat at the dining table, writing in my notebook. Day 5, Leo understands. The storm has a witness now. They still believe I'm small, fragile, easy to move. Let them. The quieter I stay, the louder the truth will sound when it hits. I placed the notebook beside the candle and stared out the window. Nathan and Celeste were out that night, some work event downtown. Their laughter had echoed in the hallway before the door closed behind them. The kind of laughter people use to convince themselves they're happy. I walked through the silent house, barefoot, touching the walls as I went. The hallway photos had been rearranged, my wedding portrait gone, replaced by one of Nathan and Celeste on a beach, all white linen and tanned smiles. I ran my thumb over the empty nail where my frame had hung. The wall was lighter there, unweathered. Fresh paint can't hide everything, I whispered. Later, I climbed the narrow attic stairs. The air smelled of cedar and thyme. I pulled open a trunk, its brass hinges squeaking softly, and found the things I hadn't shown anyone in years. George's work gloves. The first set of house blueprints he'd drafted on tracing paper, a photograph of us breaking ground on this very land. I traced the lines of his handwriting at the bottom. Lot #47, future home of George and Helen Drayton. I closed my eyes, the paper trembling just slightly in my hand. George, I murmured. They think they've won. But I learned from the best builder there ever was. The wind rattled the eaves, like laughter. I placed the blueprints back, shut the trunk, and whispered, the foundation's still mine. Downstairs, I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, the same one George had wound every Sunday. I smiled. Let them redecorate, I said to the dark. They'll never touch the beams. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bleach. Not the clean, crisp kind, the harsh, chemical sting of something meant to erase. Celeste was in the hallway, wiping the baseboards. She wore her usual armor, pressed blouse, diamond studs, a face too calm to trust. Good morning, I said, voice even. She didn't look up. You left footprints by the stairs. I glanced at the spotless floor. Did I? Her smile didn't move her eyes. It's all right. I just like things tidy. Of course, I said. You wouldn't want to leave evidence someone lived here before you. The rag froze midair for half a second. Then she resumed scrubbing. By noon, I'd decided to go into town, something I hadn't done much since George died. I needed to see people who didn't call me Mom or Ma'am. The sky was overcast, that pale gray that turns everything reflective. I stopped by the bakery, the same one George and I used to visit on Sundays after church. The girl behind the counter was new young, tattoo on her wrist, smile like she meant it. Mrs. Drayton, she said. It's been ages. Still want your lemon scone? I blinked. You know me? She grinned. My mom worked here when you and your husband used to come in. Said you tipped in exact change, always with a thank you note on the napkin. That memory hit me like sunlight through cloud. I suppose I did, I said softly. I sat at the corner table with my scone and coffee, watching the world go by outside the window. People hurrying, hands full, hearts probably fuller than they realized. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, not the ghost of someone being erased, but the woman who had built something solid, stone by stone. When I got home, the front door was ajar. The living room was full of strangers. Celeste stood in the middle, radiant and false, gesturing toward the ceiling. And we're thinking of knocking down this wall, she said to a man holding a tablet. It'll open up the space. My heart went cold. Excuse me, I said, stepping in. The man turned, startled. Oh, hello. You must be Helen. We're just looking at... This is my house, I said, quietly but firmly. Celeste's voice went sugary. Helen, darling, these are colleagues from Nathan's firm. We're showing them the layout. For what purpose? She hesitated. networking, future investment. I looked around the room. They were all watching polite, uncomfortable smiles. I nodded once. I see. Then you'll understand if I remind you that this layout and the land beneath it legally belong to me. Celeste's smile tightened. You're overreacting. Am I? I said, crossing to the bookshelf. Then, maybe you won't mind if I ask your guests to leave. No one moved. Celeste's voice dropped. You're embarrassing yourself. I met her eyes. I've been humiliated by grief, by age, by time. This is nothing. Nathan appeared in the doorway, face flushed. What's going on? Your wife is giving a tour, I said, of a house that doesn't belong to her. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Mom, please, can we not do this now? Then when? I asked. After the demolition starts? His silence told me everything. I nodded slowly. All right, you've made your plans. Now I'll make mine. I turned to the group. Thank you for coming. The tour is over. One by one, they left murmured excuses, nervous glances. Celeste didn't speak as the last door closed. When it was just the three of us, Nathan said quietly, You didn't have to embarrass us. I didn't, I said. You did that yourselves. Then I went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. That night, I sat at my desk under the dim light, my pen scratching across the page. Day 10. They've begun stripping the walls before I've even left them. But they forget. What's built with love leaves fingerprints they'll never sand away. I folded the page and slipped it into the notebook. Then I took out George's wedding ring, the one he'd stopped wearing when his fingers swelled with arthritis. I kept it in a velvet pouch, untouched all these years. I slid it onto a chain around my neck. When I looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back wasn't fragile. It was the same woman who'd held a hammer, poured cement, and cooked dinner in the same day. They think they're planning, I whispered, but so am I. The next morning, Celeste was at the kitchen island, her laptop open, spreadsheets glowing across the screen. Morning, she said, tone brisk. We're having a home appraiser over tomorrow, just to get an estimate. An estimate for what? Options, she said vaguely. I replied. You might want to get an estimate for disappointment while you're at it. She frowned. I'm not sure I like your tone. I'm not sure I care, I said, pouring coffee. She stared at me, genuinely thrown. For the first time, I saw the tiniest hint of fear behind her carefully curated calm. Don't test me, Helen. Oh, Celeste, I said gently. You don't even know what I'm capable of. I walked out, leaving her in the echo of her own silence. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, the air thick with the smell of rain. The hydrangeas trembled under the weight of their own blooms. I thought about George, about how he used to say, storms only sound dangerous if you've never been through one before. I smiled to myself. Let them come. I had weathered worse. By Thursday, the tension in the house had become something alive, thick, invisible, and humming in the walls. I could feel it when I passed the kitchen, hear it in the way Celeste slammed drawers a little too hard, see it in the way Nathan avoided my eyes. People think betrayal sounds like shouting. It doesn't. It sounds like whispering behind doors that used to stay open. I was sitting at the dining table sorting mail when Celeste stormed in, heels sharp against the floor. Her phone was in her hand, and she waved it like a weapon. Would you mind explaining this? On the screen was my name, a string of emails, and one unmistakable subject line. Trust amendment filed. Ah, so she'd finally found it. I folded my reading glasses and placed them gently beside the stack of bills. You went through my email? Her tone dripped with mock outrage. The browser was open. I clicked. Imagine my surprise when I found out you've been changing legal documents behind our backs. Backs? I said, looking up at her. Plural? You and Nathan share a spine now? Her mouth tightened. You made Leo a co-trustee, without consulting anyone. That's right, I said calmly. And you didn't tell us. I didn't think you'd be interested. Celeste's cheeks flushed, a perfect bloom of fury beneath her foundation. Not interested? Helen, this is our home too. No, dear, I said quietly. It isn't. Nathan appeared in the doorway then, laptop under his arm, face pale. What's going on? She changed the trust, Celeste snapped. Put Leo in charge. Nathan turned to me, his voice softer than hers but shaking. Is that true? It is. Why? I took my time answering. Because I stopped trusting you. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Nathan sighed, rubbing his temples. Mom, you're being emotional. No, I said, standing. I was emotional when I let you and your wife treat me like a tenant in my own house. This is deliberate. Celeste scoffed. You can't just rewrite everything because you're in a mood. I didn't rewrite, I said. I secured. Her voice rose. You're trying to control us. Control? I echoed. I built the roof over your heads, paid the bills you ignored, and still offered you a home when you had nowhere to go. If control means asking for respect, then yes, I suppose I am. Nathan looked between us, torn, shrinking before my eyes. Mom, please, he said. We can talk about this. There's no need to make it legal, but it already is. Celeste slammed her phone down on the table. You'll regret this. I've regretted enough already, I replied. She pointed toward the stairs, her voice low, dangerous. We can fight this. You're not well. Everyone knows how forgetful you've been lately. I smiled. Try that in court. Dr. Harris will enjoy testifying about my clean bill of health. That stopped her cold. Nathan looked away. Are you really going to do this? He asked, his voice small. I already have. That night, after they went upstairs, I unlocked the safe and took out the envelope I'd prepared weeks earlier. Inside was a letter to Mr. Halverson authorizing Leo to assume full authority as managing trustee effective immediately. The ink shimmered faintly under the lamplight. I signed it. My hand didn't tremble. Then I called Leo. They know, I said. Are they angry? Of course. Anger is what greed sounds like when it realizes it's losing. He was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to come over? Not tonight. But tomorrow. We go to Halverson's office. He hesitated. You sure you're ready for that? I've been ready for months, I said. I just wanted to see how long it would take them to hang themselves with their own rope. The next morning, Leo picked me up. He wore his best suit, one he hadn't touched since graduation. I noticed he'd polished his shoes, the same way George used to before every important day. Are you nervous? He asked. No, I said, watching the house fade smaller in the rearview mirror. I feel lighter already. Mr. Halverson greeted us in his small office, cluttered with papers and the smell of old coffee. He looked at me over his glasses and smiled faintly. Mrs. Drayton, I see we're making things official as ink can make them. Leo sat beside me, posture straight, jaw set. I could tell he understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Halverson unfolded the documents. Once you sign this, Leo becomes managing trustee. He'll oversee all assets in the trust, including the house. You retain life tenancy, full rights of residence, but control of the property transfers to him. I understand, I said. Are you certain? He asked gently. Once this is done, there's no taking it back without his consent. I smiled. Good, then it's finally safe from them. Leo swallowed hard. Grandma. Yes? Thank you for trusting me. I reached across the table and took his hand. You earned it. We both signed. Halverson stamped the papers with his notary seal. The sound of that stamp crisp, final, was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in years. He slid the folder back to me. It's done. On the drive home, the world felt sharper. The trees along the road gleamed with late autumn color, the air crisp with endings. Leo broke the silence. What are you going to do now? I smiled faintly. I'm going to let them find out the way they deserve to by accident. He grinned. You're terrifying when you're calm. Good, I said. They should be terrified. When I returned home, the house was empty. I stood in the doorway for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of lemon polish and rain. This is still mine, I whispered. I took off my coat, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. Outside, the hydrangeas had begun to brown at the edges, their color fading, but their stems still strong. Even flowers knew how to endure endings with dignity. The following morning dawned with a brittle stillness, the kind that comes before a storm, when even the air seems to hold its breath. Nathan and Celeste hadn't come home the night before, which suited me just fine. I took my time making breakfast, humming quietly as I buttered toast and filled the kettle. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. By 8 o'clock, Leo was in the driveway again. He'd dressed neatly, though his tie sat crooked and his eyes were rimmed with the dark rings of someone who'd been up all night thinking. He gave a small, nervous grin as I stepped out onto the porch. You ready? He asked. I've been ready since the day they tried to move me upstairs, I said. Let's go. Mr. Halverson's office was warm, smelling faintly of paper and time. The same cracked leather chair from 30 years ago still sat behind his desk. A little brass nameplate worn smooth at the edges read Harold P. Halvorsen, S.K.A. Mrs. Drayton, he said, standing to shake my hand. Leo. Sit down. Both of you. We did. I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. He adjusted his glasses, slid it open with a letter knife, and read the contents silently. Then he nodded. You've authorized your grandson as managing trustee, he said. Full authority over the assets within the trust. Correct, I replied. He tapped the page once with his pen. This gives him not only legal control, but the discretion to make decisions on your behalf regarding property management, transfer, and defense against outside claims. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. Halverson turned to Leo. You understand the gravity of this, young man? You'll be the one handling any disputes should they arise. Leo met his gaze squarely. I understand, and I'll handle them. The old lawyer smiled faintly, that look of quiet approval reserved for people who still believe in decency. Your grandmother raised you well. George did too, I said softly. I'm just finishing what he started. We spent the next hour reviewing the documents. The trust amendment was airtight. Halverson had seen to that. He'd included language George and I had agreed to long ago, protection clauses, beneficiary restrictions, a clause ensuring no third party could profit from coercion or undue influence. At one point, Halverson looked up and said, Mrs. Drayton, this is one of the most meticulous estate structures I've seen. May I ask what made you decide to move forward now? I looked at the window, where weak sunlight spilled across the blinds. Because people mistake silence for surrender, and I'm too old to let anyone mistake me again. When it was time to sign, Halverson slid the paper toward me. My hand hovered briefly over the line before I pressed the pen down. My signature came out clean, steady, final. Then Leo signed beside mine. Halverson notarized each page, stamping them with the slow deliberation of a priest blessing holy ground. He sat back. That's it, he said. It's done. You've effectively built a fortress around yourself, Mrs. Drayton. They can knock on the gates all they like, but they'll never get in. I smiled. Good. I'm tired of patching holes. Outside, the autumn light felt sharper. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk like gossip running ahead of truth. Leo walked beside me, hands in his pockets, his shoulders squared. Do you think they'll find out soon? He asked. Oh, they'll find out, I said. People like Celeste always find out. It's in her nature, curiosity disguised as control. He laughed softly. And Dad? He'll do what he always does, I said. Follow her lead until it's too late to turn back. We reached the car. He opened the door for me, another small habit George had taught him as a boy. When he got in, I rested a hand lightly on his arm. Leo, I said, you understand what happens next, don't you? He frowned. They're going to come for you. No, I said. They'll come for you. You're the wall now. I'm just the story they'll try to rewrite. He stared ahead, jaw tightening. Then I'll make sure the ink never dries. When I stepped back into the house that afternoon, it felt different, emptier somehow, but in a way that made breathing easier. I walked to the window overlooking the garden. The hydrangeas had begun their slow decline into winter brown, but their stalks stood straight. They didn't bow, even when the cold set in. I'd spent my life like those flowers, stubborn, quiet, blooming when no one was watching. And now, even if everything else in this house changed, that truth would stay rooted. On the counter, Celeste's phone lay charging, a faint buzz breaking the silence every few seconds. Messages, no doubt. Plans, schemes. I ignored it. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 12. The papers are signed, the lines are drawn. Let them think they're winning. The law is patient, so am I. That evening, I cooked again. Simple stew, the way George liked it, with carrots, thyme, and a splash of red wine. The smell filled the kitchen, seeping into the corners Celeste had tried so hard to sterilize. When Nathan came home, he paused at the door. It smells like childhood, he said quietly. For some of us, it still is, I replied. He hesitated. Can we talk tomorrow about everything? Of course, I said. Tomorrow. He smiled, small and tired, and went upstairs. When the floorboard stopped creaking, I whispered to the empty air, Tomorrow never belonged to you, Nathan. It never did. I went to bed early, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady tick of the clock, the pulse of a house that had outlived greed once and could do it again. Before turning out the light, I wrote one last note in the margin of my notebook. The foundations remember who laid them, and so do I. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. Then 2 more. Then the sound of tires grinding the gravel outside, the unmistakable slam of a car door. By the time I opened the front door, Nathan was already halfway up the porch steps, his face pale with fury. Celeste followed, dressed like she was headed for a deposition, hair slick, blouse starched, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk," Nathan said. "Do we?" I asked. "Because lately, all I've done is listen." He didn't smile. "What did you do?" "Define what?" I said. "You know what?" Celeste snapped. "The trust. The amendment. That ridiculous meeting with your lawyer. You made Leo the managing trustee. You gave him control of everything." I tilted my head. "That's not ridiculous. That's responsible." Celeste's heels clicked on the wood as she stepped closer. "You can't do that without consulting us." "Consulting you?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the people who told me to start packing my things?" Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, please. This is getting out of hand. You can't just—" "I can," I said, my tone low and measured. And I did. We stood in silence, the air heavy with the kind of quiet that comes before lightning. Celeste was the first to crack. "You're senile," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't rational. Leo manipulated you." "Leo's the only one who hasn't asked me for money or mercy," I said. "So if manipulation means kindness, then maybe I've been starving for it." Nathan's face twisted anger or shame. I couldn't tell. "Mom, you're ruining everything." "No," I said, walking toward the window where the hydrangeas drooped in the rain. "I'm saving what's left." Celeste took a step forward, voice rising. "You think this makes you noble? You're just spiteful, old, bitter. You can't stand that we're moving on without you." I turned, meeting her glare. "You're not moving on, Celeste. You're moving in and over. You've been doing it piece by piece since the day you unpacked your first box." Her lips parted, ready with another insult, but Nathan's voice cut in. "Enough." He looked at me, his expression softer now, almost pleading. "Mom, you can undo this. We can start fresh. Just transfer the deed. Make it easy, please." "Make it easy," I repeated. "For whom?" "For all of us," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't have to fight us. We're family." "Family?" I said quietly. "Family doesn't lock away someone's memories and call it decluttering." He exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "You've always been dramatic. And you've always been disappointing," I said. Celeste's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then lifted her chin. "Our attorney's waiting," she said coldly. "If you don't reverse this by Friday, we'll file a petition for competency review." I smiled faintly. "Then I suppose we'll see each other in court." Nathan's face fell. "Mom, don't do this." "Oh, I'm not doing anything," I said. "You are." I walked past them, into the kitchen, and set my mug down. The clink echoed in the silence between us. "You both keep mistaking silence for surrender," I said without turning around. I was quiet because I was waiting for the right moment to speak. Celeste crossed her arms. "And this is your big moment? Throwing away your own son?" I turned then, eyes steady. "No, Celeste, I'm throwing away the parasite that's been feeding on him." She blinked, her face tightening like glass about to crack. "You'll regret that." I smiled. "Maybe. But at least I'll have the peace of knowing I did the right thing." At that moment, a voice came from the hallway. "Everything all right?" "Leo." He'd arrived quietly, his presence like a sudden gust of fresh air. He stepped forward, hands tucked in his pockets, posture calm, but commanding. "I thought we could all talk together," he said. Celeste scoffed. "You've got some nerve showing up here." "Funny," he said. "You didn't seem to mind when I was mowing your lawn last summer." Nathan looked stunned. "Leo, this isn't your business." "It is now," he said, his voice firm. "I'm the trustee." Celeste's jaw dropped. "What?" "You heard me," he said, producing a folder from his briefcase. "Signed, sealed, notarized. As of this week, I'm the managing trustee of my grandmother's estate." Nathan turned to me, his voice breaking. "You actually did it." "I told you," I said softly. I was done waiting. Celeste took a step forward, her tone sharp. You're 25 years old, Leo. You have no idea how to handle an estate. Maybe not, he said, but I know how to handle a bully. Nathan's voice rose. That's enough. Leo didn't flinch. No, Dad. What's enough is watching you let her treat Grandma like a burden. What's enough is pretending respect is optional. Celeste's voice trembled now. You think you're some kind of hero? No, he said. I'm just what you made me, a witness who finally got tired of watching. The rain outside had grown heavier, streaking the windows. It was the kind of storm that made everything blur the world, the lines between guilt and love. I stood there, watching the two of them unravel. Nathan pacing, Celeste sputtering, Leo standing firm. And for the first time, I didn't feel small or cornered. I felt like a woman reclaiming her ground. You can leave now, I said quietly. Celeste stared at me, her mouth twisting into something that wasn't quite a smile. You think this is over? Oh, sweetheart, I said. It's just beginning. Nathan hesitated, then turned toward the door. Come on, he muttered. Celeste lingered for one last second, eyes full of venom. You'll die alone, Helen. I smiled faintly. Better alone than surrounded by thieves. The door slammed. The sound echoed down the hallway like punctuation. Leo let out a long breath and rubbed his forehead. That went about how I expected. Messy? I asked. Explosive, he said. But necessary. I nodded. The truth always is. He sat at the table across from me, resting his elbows on the worn wood. You sure you're okay? I've never been more okay, I said. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. The hydrangeas bent under the downpour, their heavy blooms nodding toward the earth. But they didn't break. Neither would I. 2 days passed before the envelope came through the mail slot, thick, official. The kind of paper that smells like trouble. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen table beside the sugar bowl and made tea instead. A woman should never face betrayal on an empty stomach. When I finally slid it open, my eyes skimmed the words. Petition for review of trust validity. Filed by Nathan Drayton and Celeste Drayton. Grounds. Suspected mental incompetence of settlor. A slow, bitter laugh escaped me. Of course, I murmured. When love fails, greed always finds a lawyer. I called Leo. They've filed, I said simply. He cursed under his breath. They're going after your capacity? They're going after my dignity, I replied. But they'll only get their reflection. We met with Mr. Halverson that afternoon. His office looked smaller than before, maybe because the stakes had grown. He scanned the documents, then nodded grimly. They don't have to prove you're unfit. They just have to plant doubt. Can they win? Leo asked. Halverson tapped the petition with his pen. Not with this. You've got notarized records, medical letters, and a coherent paper trail. They're bluffing, but a bluff can still bruise. I folded my hands. Let them try. I've been doubted before and survived worse. Halverson smiled faintly. Then we'll prepare a counter. Quiet, factual, airtight. That night, the phone rang again, Celeste's number flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. Her messages came in bursts. You've made a mistake. We're not done. This could have been peaceful. Peaceful, I thought. Peaceful is what vultures call silence before the feast. I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 42, they've chosen war. I'll fight it with grace and evidence. They confuse my calm with weakness. Let them. The following week brought the hearing notice, probate court, Monday at 9. I spent Sunday polishing my shoes, pressing my blouse, and baking a loaf of banana bread for Leo. Preparation, I've learned, is another form of prayer. On Monday morning, Leo picked me up. He was quiet, jaw tight, eyes hard. You sure you want to do this? He asked. I've been sure since the day they told me I was in the way, I said. We arrived early. The courthouse smelled of waxed floors and history, both things that endure whether people deserve them or not. Celeste was already there, her lips painted into a sharp smile. Nathan sat beside her, pale, eyes flicking toward me and then away. Their lawyer, a man in a crisp navy suit, looked like he'd never heard the word conscience. The proceedings began promptly. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, scanned the papers as though she'd seen every flavor of family betrayal before breakfast. Celeste's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, practiced. My clients merely wish to ensure Mrs. Drayton's decisions reflect her sound mind and were not unduly influenced by her grandson. He gestured toward me, polite but dismissive the way people gesture at relics in museums. When he finished, Halverson rose. He didn't grandstand. He simply placed 3 documents before the judge. Your Honor, the trust was executed lawfully. The settler underwent a mental capacity evaluation by her physician, Dr. Harris, who has also provided a signed statement affirming her clarity and decision-making ability. He handed over the affidavit. The judge read in silence. Then she looked up. Mrs. Drayton, would you like to say anything? I stood, slowly, deliberately. My voice didn't shake. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm here to be recognized as the woman who still knows her own name, her own will, and the worth of her own labor. I looked directly at Nathan. This house they're fighting for, I built it with my hands, paid for it with my years, and filled it with memories they've forgotten. I'm not confused. I'm disappointed. The judge nodded once. Thank you, Mrs. Drayton. It took her less than 10 minutes to decide. The petition is dismissed, she said. The trust stands as filed. There is no evidence of incompetence or coercion. Celeste's face drained of color. Nathan bowed his head. The gavel came down like punctuation on a prayer. Outside the courthouse, Leo hugged me. You were incredible. No, I said, exhaling. I was necessary. We stood for a while under the gray morning light. People passed, unaware that something enormous had just shifted inside me. Not victory, not vengeance, but peace. Leo looked at me with that quiet pride only good men inherit. So what now? He asked. Now, I said, I start living again. And they learn how silence feels when it's no longer mine to keep. 2 days after the hearing, I woke before dawn. The world was still, the house quieter than it had ever been. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort it, just confirms what's gone. I moved through the rooms barefoot, touching the edges of furniture that had survived 4 decades of family and betrayal alike. The air still smelled faintly of lemon oil and old wood. Every corner whispered the same question. Are you staying? I wasn't. Not because they'd won, they hadn't, but because the fight was over, and I was done living among ghosts who called themselves family. By 8 o'clock, Leo arrived with the truck. His sleeves were rolled up, eyes soft but knowing. You don't have to rush, he said. I'm not rushing, I replied, folding a quilt into a cedar trunk. I'm choosing the pace. He smiled faintly. That's very you. We carried boxes together, small ones. I'd already given away most of what didn't matter. The rest letters, old photographs, George's tools, the faded notebook where I'd written every date that mattered fit neatly into the back seat. As I turned the key in the lock one final time, Nathan appeared at the end of the driveway. He looked smaller than I remembered. You're leaving? He asked. I'm beginning, I said. He exhaled, running a trembling hand through his hair. You really hate me that much? I paused. No. I love you enough to stop pretending you'll ever understand me. He swallowed hard. You didn't have to make it this way. I didn't, I said softly. You did, when you chose her comfort over my dignity. He looked away. What'll happen to the house? It'll outlive all of us, I said, and it'll mean something again. Leo started the truck. The engine hummed, steady as my heartbeat. I didn't look back. The road out of Brookvale curved through the same hills George and I had driven when we first found the lot. I remembered his hand on the wheel, his grin when he said, It'll take work, but it'll be ours. It was. It still was. Just no longer for me to sleep in. Leo dropped me off at the White Orchard co-living farmstead, a wide, sunlit house with ivy creeping up its porch and laughter spilling from the open kitchen windows. Women of every age moved about, carrying baskets, pruning roses, baking bread. Louise met me at the door. Helen, she said, smiling warmly. We've been waiting for you. That simple sentence almost broke me. She led me to a small room with white curtains and a narrow bed. A window overlooked the orchard, where late autumn sunlight dripped over rows of golden apples. It was modest, but it was mine. That first night, I wrote a single sentence in my new notebook. You can lose your house and still come home. The next morning, I joined the women for breakfast. They talked and laughed, but no one asked for explanations. They didn't need to. Pain recognizes its own. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds, planting rosemary. The earth was cool under my hands, forgiving. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I felt useful, present, whole. A week later, Leo came by. He'd already filed the transfer paperwork for the future donation. The George and Helen Drayton home would one day serve as transitional housing for women, starting over women who'd been told their time was up, their worth expired. He sat on the porch, watching the trees move. "It feels right," he said. "It is," I replied. "We build so others can stand." He smiled. "Grandma, you're finally free." I looked at the orchard, the sun filtering through branches like forgiveness. "No," I said. "I'm finally seen." That night, as I watched the first stars bloom above the farmhouse roof, I realized something small and astonishing. I didn't miss the house. I missed who I'd been inside it. But now, that woman had stepped out of her cage and started walking toward herself again. And if anyone ever asked, I'd tell them this: you are never too old to reclaim the story they tried to write for you. You can still bloom after the pruning. You can still belong after being forgotten. And if you're hearing this, if some part of you knows what it feels like to be erased by your own family, remember, you are not done. You are not invisible. You are not small. Give this story a voice. Share it if it touched you. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths.